Thunder cracked across the sky as 7-year-old Emily pressed herself against the cold brick wall of Rosehaven Orphanage, her small frame shivering in the February rain. The ancient building loomed behind her, its windows gleaming like watchful eyes in the darkness. Her escape attempt had seemed simple enough in daylight: wait until dinner, slip through the kitchen door, and run to the police station she'd seen on their rare outings. But now, soaked to the bone and lost in the maze of the facility's grounds, terror gripped her heart. "Check the East Wing again," Michael Thompson's voice boomed across the courtyard. Flashlight beams cut through the rain like searching fingers. Emily's heart pounded as boots splashed through puddles, drawing closer. She clutched her most precious possession, a worn photograph of a beautiful woman she'd stolen from the office files, somehow feeling it was important. At that moment, a sleek black car pulled up to the orphanage gates, its headlights illuminating the scene. Through the rain-streaked windows, James Morrison sat frozen, staring at the search party combing the grounds. He'd chosen this strange hour to visit, hoping to avoid any media attention to his donation, but fate had other plans. As he stepped out of his car, umbrella in hand, his eyes locked with Emily's across the courtyard. The photograph slipped from her trembling fingers, landing face up in a puddle, revealing the image of his late wife, Sarah. The world seemed to stop as recognition dawned in both their eyes. For James, it was like seeing a ghost, not of Sarah as he'd last seen her, but Sarah as she appeared in their childhood photos. For Emily, it was the first time anyone had looked at her with something other than contempt or pity. Neither knew it then, but this moment would unravel a web of lies that had been carefully woven for 7 years. Mr. Morrison Thompson's voice cut through the rain as he rushed forward, trying to position himself between James and Emily. "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow morning." But it was too late. The photograph, Sarah's face, and a truth too long buried had already set in motion events that would change all their lives forever. If you found this story touching, please consider subscribing. Your support helps me create more meaningful content that explores the depths of human emotions and life's profound moments. 8 years had passed since the day that shattered James Morrison's world. At 45, he stood at the pinnacle of Silicon Valley success, CEO of Morrison Technologies, with a net worth exceeding $3 billion. Yet behind the polished exterior of America's most eligible widower lay a man haunted by loss and regret. James had met Sarah Bennett during their sophomore year at Stanford. She wasn't like the other girls from wealthy families who pursued him for his emerging tech success. Instead, she challenged his ideas, pushed him to think beyond profit margins, and showed him that true wealth lay in helping others. Their love story had been the talk of Silicon Valley, the brilliant tech entrepreneur and the passionate humanitarian who devoted her life to children's causes. Their wedding day remained etched in his memory. Sarah, radiant in white, whispering her dreams of building a foundation to help underprivileged children. "Promise me, James," she'd said, "that no matter what happens, you'll never forget there are children out there who need us." He'd promised, of course, though at the time his focus had been on building his empire. The accident happened on a rainy night, much like this one. Sarah had been driving back from what she'd called an important meeting, one she'd been unusually secretive about. The police report was clinical: wet roads, brake failure, a tragic accident. But something about it had never sat right with James. Sarah had always been a careful driver, and the car had been recently serviced. In the aftermath, James discovered Sarah had been living a life he knew nothing about. She'd been making regular trips to various orphanages and children's homes, spending hours with the kids, and working on some kind of project she kept in a separate email account he couldn't access. When he tried to investigate further, he hit wall after wall of bureaucratic resistance. The loss transformed James. The once innovative and passionate tech leader became known as the Ice King of Silicon Valley. He buried himself in work, turning Morrison Technologies into a global powerhouse. But each success felt hollow, each achievement meaningless without Sarah to share it with. The only thing that kept him going was their shared dream, the Morrison Foundation for Children's Welfare, which he established in her memory. Years of therapy had helped him function, but hadn't healed the deeper wounds. He kept their mansion exactly as Sarah had left it, her clothes still hanging in the closet, her garden tended daily by staff who followed her old plans to the letter. The media called it eccentric, his friends called it unhealthy. James called it loyalty. Every year on their anniversary, he would read Sarah's old journals, searching for clues about her last days. The entries became increasingly cryptic in the months before her death, filled with vague references to a precious secret she needed to protect. His investigators had found nothing, but James never stopped wondering what Sarah had been trying to tell him. Now, standing in the rain at Rosehaven Orphanage, all the questions he'd tried to bury came rushing back. The photograph in the puddle, the little girl's face, it was like seeing Sarah's childhood photos come to life. It defied logic, yet the resemblance was undeniable. For the first time in 8 years, James felt truly awake, as if Sarah was sending him a message from beyond here was the key to the mystery she'd taken to her grave. That's why he'd come to Rosehaven tonight, breaking his usual pattern of sending foundation representatives to handle donations. Something in Sarah's last journal entry had caught his eye. Rosehaven holds the thorns and the blooms of truth. Sometimes love must hide in shadows to survive. At the time, he'd dismissed it as Sarah's poetic way of writing. Now, looking at the little girl being ushered away by the orphanage staff, those words took on a whole new meaning. James straightened his shoulders, feeling a familiar determination he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Whatever secrets Rosehaven held, whatever truth Sarah had tried to protect, he would find it. He owed her that much, and perhaps he owed even more to the little girl with his wife's eyes. Life for Emily at Rosehaven Orphanage was a carefully orchestrated dance of survival. At 7 years old, she had already mastered the art of becoming invisible when Michael Thompson stormed through the halls, learned to eat quickly during meals before the older kids could steal her food, and discovered which floorboards wouldn't creak when she snuck to the attic, her sanctuary, where she kept her treasures. Those treasures weren't much a torn teddy bear she'd found in the donation bin, a small notebook with drawings of the family she imagined having, and now her most precious possession, the photograph of a beautiful woman who shared her eyes. Emily had first glimpsed the photo while cleaning Thompson's office as punishment for asking too many questions about her parents. Something about the woman's smile called to her, like a half-remembered lullaby. The other children at Rosehaven gave Emily a wide berth. They whispered that she was different, marked by the strange coincidence that she'd been found on the same day the famous Sarah Morrison died. The older kids claimed it was bad luck to befriend her, but Emily knew the real reason. Thompson watched her more closely than the others, and friendship with Emily meant unwanted attention. Only Linda Parker, the elderly nurse, showed her genuine kindness. Linda would sometimes slip her extra portions during mealtimes or tend to her mysterious allergic reactions that seemed to occur after the mandatory medical checkups. The old nurse had a way of appearing whenever Thompson's temper flared in Emily's direction, armed with convenient tasks that required the girl's immediate assistance in the infirmary. Emily's days followed a strict routine. Wake at 6 a.m., cold showers, bland breakfast, classes in the orphanage's bare-bones schoolroom, chores, more chores, and the dreaded weekly medical examinations. Unlike the other children who rotated chore duties, Emily was permanently assigned to cleaning the administrative wing, a task that kept her within Thompson's watchful eye and away from visitors during adoption hours. The worst part wasn't the loneliness or the work, it was the pills. Every evening Thompson personally supervised as she swallowed the vitamins that made her stomach churn and her head spin. Emily had learned early on that pretending to swallow and later disposing of the pills led to harsh consequences. She still had the scar on her knee from her last attempt at resistance. At night, lying in her narrow bed in the room she shared with 3 other girls, Emily would stare out the window at the stars and imagine stories about her real parents. Sometimes they were secret agents who had to hide her for her own protection. Other times they were royalty from a distant country. But her favorite fantasy was simpler, that somewhere out there someone was looking for her, someone was Zai Ka, someone who would recognize her and say, "There you are." I've been searching for you forever." The other children came and went. Every few months, a lucky few would be adopted, their beds quickly filled by new arrivals. But Emily remained year after year, watching families choose other children, while Thompson steered potential parents away from her with whispered warnings about medical issues and special needs. She'd overheard Thompson once, speaking to someone on the phone. The girl remains secure. No adoption inquiries. Yes, the treatments continue as scheduled. No, she doesn't remember anything from before. The conversation had ended abruptly when he noticed her shadow in the doorway, leading to another round of vitamins and a week of kitchen duty. But Emily did remember something: a warm laugh, the scent of gardenias, and a soft voice singing "You Are My Sunshine." These fragments of memory felt connected to the woman in the photograph, though she couldn't explain why. The same instinct that told her to run tonight had also told her to grab that photo from Thompson's files. Now, as she was led back inside by stern-faced staff members, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The way the wealthy man at the gate had looked at her, like he'd seen a ghost, stirred something in her memory. For the first time in her life at Rosehaven, Emily felt something dangerous and wonderful growing in her heart: hope. Michael Thompson commanded Rosehaven Orphanage with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove of charitable pretense. At 58, his silver hair and designer suits projected the image of a distinguished humanitarian, but his eyes held the cold calculation of a man who'd mastered the art of profiting from others' misfortunes. His public persona, the dedicated orphanage director who'd sacrificed a lucrative medical career to help children, had earned him numerous humanitarian awards. Yet behind closed doors, he ran Rosehaven like a prison, keeping meticulous records of every child's treatment progress. Linda Parker had served as Rosehaven's head nurse for over 3 decades. At 72, her weathered face and stooped shoulders belied a sharp mind and unwavering spirit. She'd started working at the orphanage during Sarah Morrison's childhood, and the weight of secrets she carried showed in her tired eyes. Linda moved through the halls like a guardian angel, her white uniform pristine, pockets always filled with candy for the children who needed comfort. She watched Thompson's actions with quiet defiance, documenting everything in a diary hidden beneath her floorboards. Robert Wilson, CEO of Wilson Pharmaceuticals, portrayed himself as America's healthcare hero. His company's charitable programs provided free medications to orphanages nationwide, including Rosehaven. Old, distinguished, and widowed, he cultivated the image of a grieving husband who'd channeled his loss into helping others. Few knew of his connection to Sarah Morrison's past, or the true nature of his interest in Rosehaven's young residents. Detective Mark Reynolds had investigated Sarah Morrison's accident 8 years ago. Now nearing retirement, he kept a file labeled Morrison in his desk drawer, filled with unanswered questions. The break lines, the missing witness statements, Sarah's final phone calls, none of it added up. He'd maintained contact with James Morrison over the years, sensing there was more to the story than a simple car accident. Dr. Rachel Chen, a newly hired pediatrician at Rosehaven, began noticing disturbing patterns in the children's medical records. Fresh out of her residency and idealistic, she'd taken the job hoping to make a difference. Her growing concern about the vitamin regimen prescribed to certain children, especially Emily, put her at odds with Thompson's authority. Martha Sullivan, the orphanage's elderly cook, served as the children's unofficial grandmother figure. Her kitchen provided more than meals. It was a safe haven where children could find warmth, extra snacks, and a sympathetic ear. She'd worked at Rosehaven since Sarah's time and recognized Emily's resemblance immediately, though she kept this observation to herself. Jessica Thompson, Michael's wife and Rosehaven's administrative assistant, turned a blind eye to her husband's activities, consoling herself with shopping sprees funded by their mysterious consulting fees. Yet lately, Emily's resemblance to Sarah had begun stirring uncomfortable memories of past choices and silenced conscience. David Carter, the local journalist who'd covered Sarah's accident, never stopped feeling that he'd missed something crucial in the story. His ongoing investigation into Wilson Pharmaceuticals' clinical trials had recently led him back to Rose Haven's doorstep, though he didn't yet realize the connection to Sarah Morrison's death. Together, these individuals formed a web of secrets, lies and suppressed truths surrounding Emily's existence. Some sought to protect her, others to control her, but all would soon be drawn into a confrontation that would expose long-buried secrets and challenge their most closely held beliefs about right and wrong. The morning after the Rainey incident, James Morrison returned to Rosehaven Orphanage, this time through official channels. The building looked different in daylight, less foreboding, but somehow more depressing. Peeling paint and worn fixtures betrayed years of minimal maintenance, despite the substantial donations the facility received. Every detail heightened his suspicion that something was deeply wrong at Rosehaven. Michael Thompson greeted him in the main office, the perfect picture of apologetic concern. "Mr. Morrison, I cannot apologize enough for last night's unfortunate incident. Rest assured, we've taken steps to prevent such disruptions in the future." His smile never reached his eyes as he gestured toward a leather chair. "Emily has been disciplined appropriately." The mention of punishment made James's jaw tighten. "I'd like to meet her, if possible. That was the purpose of my visit, after all, to meet some of the children benefiting from the Morrison Foundation's support." He kept his voice level, practicing the control that had earned him his reputation in Silicon Valley. Thompson's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. "Of course, though I should warn you, Emily can be difficult. She has a history of behavioral issues and requires special medical attention. Perhaps you'd prefer to meet some of our other children." He reached for a file drawer, but James raised his hand to stop him. "Emily will be fine," James insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Thompson nodded stiffly and pressed his intercom button, requesting Linda to bring Emily to the office. The tension in the room grew thick as they waited, broken only by Thompson's practiced small talk about the orphanage's recent achievements. When the door finally opened, James felt his heart stop. In daylight, the resemblance was even more striking. Emily stood in the doorway, wearing a faded blue dress that had seen better days, her dark hair pulled back in a neat braid, Linda's handiwork, no doubt. But it was her eyes that caught him, Sarah's eyes, filled with the same quiet determination he'd fallen in love with years ago. "Emily, this is Mr. Morrison," Thompson introduced, his voice honey-sweet. "He's one of our most generous benefactors." Emily curtsied mechanically, a rehearsed movement that spoke of strict training, but her eyes never left James's face. She was searching for something. He realized the same something he saw in her. "Hello, Emily," James said softly, kneeling to meet her at eye level, ignoring Thompson's subtle noise of disapproval. "I heard you like to draw. Would you show me some of your artwork?" He pulled out a sketchbook he'd brought specifically for this moment, remembering how Sarah used to carry one everywhere. The girl's eyes widened at the gift, her carefully composed facade cracking slightly. She looked to Thompson for permission, receiving a terse nod. As she accepted the sketchbook, her small fingers brushed James's hand, and he felt her slip something into his palm, a folded piece of paper. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, then added in a rush, "Would you like to see my favorite spot in the garden?" "I promise to stay where the cameras can see us." The last part was directed at Thompson, another practiced line that made James's suspicions deepen. Thompson began to object, but James was already standing. "I'd love to. Perhaps Nurse Parker could accompany us." He'd noticed the elderly nurse hovering protectively in the doorway. Thompson's face tightened for a moment before smoothing back into its practiced smile. "Of course, though, we shouldn't take too much of your valuable time, Mr. Morrison. I'm sure you have a busy schedule." The warning was subtle but clear: don't get too involved. But as James followed Emily and Linda into the garden, watching the girl's shoulders straighten with each step away from Thompson's office, he knew it was already too late. The folded paper in his pocket felt like it was burning a hole through his suit, a message, a cry for help, or perhaps the first thread that would unravel the mystery of why this child looked so much like his late wife. In the garden, between rose bushes that had seen better days, Emily began to talk about her drawings, her voice growing more animated with each word. James watched her, noting how she kept glancing at the security cameras, how Linda positioned herself to block certain angles, how her small hands shook slightly despite her brave smile. Every detail confirmed what his heart had known since last night. This child was connected to Sarah, and she needed his help. Later that afternoon, Linda Parker made her way through Rose Haven's dimly lit corridors with practiced stealth. Years of working under Thompson's regime had taught her how to move unnoticed, how to time her actions between security camera sweeps. She carried a medical tray, her perfect alibi for moving through restricted areas, but her true purpose lay in the folded note hidden beneath the bandages. Reaching the administrative wing, she paused at James Morrison's voice drifting from Thompson's office. "I'd like to review your medical protocols, particularly regarding Emily's treatment." The response was muffled, but Linda could imagine Thompson's practiced deflection. She'd witnessed it countless times over the years. Linda's hands trembled slightly as she recalled Sarah's last visit to Rose Haven 8 years ago. "Promise me you'll protect her," Sarah had pleaded, pressing a sealed envelope into her hands. "If anything happens to me, make sure this reaches James when the time is right." That envelope, along with Sarah's journal, remained hidden in Linda's cottage, waiting for the proper moment. When James finally emerged from Thompson's office, Linda orchestrated their collision perfectly. Medical supplies clattered to the floor, giving her the excuse to whisper as they both bent to gather them. "Meet me at St. Michael's Church tonight at 8. Come alone." She pressed a small key into his hand amidst the scattered gauze. Throughout the day, Linda maintained her routine while watching the subtle changes in the orphanage's atmosphere. Thompson made 3 calls to an unlisted number. Security guards were repositioned. Emily was suddenly due for an emergency medical examination, one that Linda managed to delay by reporting a contaminated batch of supplies. But at her medication station, Linda continued her years-long deception of switching Emily's prescribed pills with harmless vitamins. She'd been doing this since discovering the true nature of Thompson's treatment program, documenting every substitution in her hidden records. The real pills went into a locked box in her cottage, evidence for a day she prayed would come. As evening approached, Linda noticed David Carter, the journalist, lurking near the orphanage gates. Their eyes met briefly, another player in this dangerous game of secrets. She'd been feeding him carefully selected information for months, building a foundation for the storm she knew was coming. In her small office, Linda updated her coded diary with trembling hands. S.M.'s widower visited today. E shows signs of remembering. T increasingly agitated. R.W. expected tomorrow. Each entry could prove vital later, assuming she lived long enough to reveal them. She thought about the security footage she'd been quietly collecting, the medical records she'd duplicated, the photographs she'd hidden. 8 years of gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment, or perhaps waiting for her courage to match her conscience. At 7:30 p.m., Linda began her evening rounds, her last task before leaving for St. Michael's Church. She stopped at Emily's bed, ostensibly to check her temperature. "Be brave, little one," she whispered, slipping a small photograph under the girl's pillow, another piece of Sarah for Emily to hold on to. As she signed out for the evening, Linda felt Thompson's eyes following her. She maintained her routine perfectly, checking her watch, mentioning her weekly church group, adjusting her old cardigan. She'd played this role for so long it was second nature, but tonight felt different. Tonight she would finally begin fulfilling her promise to Sarah. In her car, Linda touched the cross hanging from her rearview mirror, Sarah's last Christmas gift to her. "Guide me," she whispered, to Sarah or God or perhaps both. The weight of her knowledge felt heavier than ever. Emily's true identity, the real circumstances of Sarah's death, Wilson Pharmaceuticals' secret trials, Thompson's complicity. Each secret represented a life in danger. Emily's, James's, her own. As she drove towards St. Michael's Church, Linda rehearsed what she would tell James. Not everything that would be too dangerous for both of them, but enough to start unraveling the carefully constructed web of lies surrounding Emily. She had to time this perfectly. One wrong move could spell disaster for everyone involved. "Forgive me, Sarah," she whispered to the empty car. "I should have acted sooner," but even as the guilt gnawed at her, Linda knew Sarah would have understood. Sometimes keeping secrets was the only way to keep people safe. And sometimes revealing them was the only way to save them. The first crack in Rose Haven's carefully maintained facade appeared 3 days after James Morrison's initial visit. Dr. Rachel Chen was reviewing Emily's medical files late at night when she noticed alarming discrepancies. The vitamin supplements prescribed to Emily matched the chemical composition of experimental compounds she'd researched during her residency, compounds that had been deemed too risky for clinical trials. While cross-referencing other children's records, Rachel discovered a pattern. Every few years, a child would be designated for special medical attention, always following substantial donations from Wilson Pharmaceuticals. These children's files contained identical symptoms: headaches, nausea, occasional memory loss. Most disturbing of all, these children eventually disappeared from the records, their files marked transferred with no destination specified. In the staff break room, Martha Sullivan, the cook, was cleaning up when she overheard Thompson arguing on the phone. "We can't move her now. Not with Morrison sniffing around. Yes, I understand the protocol, but this is different. She's becoming unstable." Asking questions about the photograph, Martha's hand shook as she recalled similar conversations before other children's sudden transfers. Detective Mark Reynolds, unable to shake his suspicions about Sarah Morrison's accident, began making unofficial visits to businesses along her last known route. At a small gas station, he finally found what he'd been searching for: archived security footage from the night of the crash. The timestamp showed Sarah's car being followed by a black SUV, a detail mysteriously absent from the original investigation. James Morrison's security team, discreetly monitoring Rose Haven, reported unusual nighttime deliveries. Unmarked vans arrived after hours, and men in lab coats carried sealed containers into the building's east wing. More troubling were the weekly visits from Wilson Pharmaceuticals representatives, always coinciding with Emily's medical checkups. David Carter, investigating a tip about pharmaceutical testing on orphans, traced a series of shell companies back to Wilson Pharmaceuticals. Each company had made substantial donations to Rose Haven, specifically earmarked for medical care enhancement. His attempts to interview former Rose Haven residents were met with silence or carefully scripted responses about excellent medical care. Linda Parker's dutiful record-keeping revealed another disturbing trend. Children selected for the special medical program shared a common trait: they had no traceable family connections, no one to ask difficult questions about their treatment or whereabouts. Emily's file was unique only in its extensive documentation and Thompson's personal oversight. Jessica Thompson, during one of her shopping trips, accidentally used her husband's credit card, revealing payments from an offshore account linked to Wilson Pharmaceuticals. The amounts corresponded with dates of children's transfers. Her guilty conscience led her to drink more heavily, and she began dropping hints to the staff about necessary sacrifices for medical progress. Rachel Chen discovered a locked room in the East Wing, officially designated as storage but requiring a biometric scan for entry. Through the window, she glimpsed state-of-the-art medical equipment far beyond what any orphanage would need for routine care. When she questioned Thompson about it, she was promptly reminded of her confidentiality agreement. Emily herself provided the most haunting evidence. Her drawings, which she now shared with James during his regular visits, showed recurring themes: shadowy figures in white coats, needles, and a strange room with bright lights. More disturbing were the dreams she described to Linda, memories of conversations she couldn't have witnessed, including one about Sarah Morrison's final days. Martha noticed that Emily's appetite would diminish dramatically after her weekly treatments, but Thompson insisted she be forced to eat. Other children whispered about screams coming from the East Wing at night, about friends who disappeared after asking too many questions, about the special vitamins that made some kids forget their own names. The pieces were there for anyone willing to see them: the medical records, the financial trails, the security footage, the disappeared children, and at the center of it all, a little girl who looked too much like Sarah Morrison to be coincidence. But seeing the pieces was one thing, proving them without putting Emily at risk was another. As these discoveries accumulated, the atmosphere at Rosehaven grew increasingly tense. Thompson increased security measures, installed new cameras, and restricted staff access to certain areas. Linda began copying records more urgently. Rachel documented everything she saw, and Martha kept her ears open during Thompson's late-night phone calls. The orphanage's dark secrets were beginning to surface like bodies rising in troubled waters. For those who had maintained the facade for so long, the question was no longer if the truth would emerge, but when and who would survive its revelation. The truth about Emily's condition emerged during what should have been a routine medical examination. Dr. Rachel Chen was reviewing the girl's latest blood work when she noticed something extraordinary: a rare genetic marker she'd only seen once before in her medical career. The same marker had been the subject of her graduate thesis, von Recklinghausen's neurofibromatosis, an extremely rare hereditary condition affecting only 1 in several million people. Her hands trembled as she pulled up Sarah Morrison's old medical records from the hospital database. There it was, the exact same genetic marker. The statistical probability of this being a coincidence was virtually zero. Rachel sat back in her chair, the weight of this discovery pressing heavily on her chest. Dr. Chen, Emily's small voice startled her. The girl stood in the doorway of the medical office, scheduled for her weekly checkup. Today, Rachel noticed things she'd overlooked before: the slight tremor in Emily's left hand, the occasional squinting in bright light, the small cafe au lait spots on her arms, all classic symptoms of the condition, all matching Sarah Morrison's documented medical history. As Rachel began the examination, she carefully documented everything while engaging Emily in conversation. "Does your head hurt sometimes, Emily?" Especially after reading, the girl nodded, then looked nervously at the camera in the corner. "It's okay," Rachel assured her, positioning herself to block the camera's view. "You can tell me." "The lights hurt sometimes," Emily whispered, "and I see things. Memories that don't feel like mine. A garden with red roses, a woman singing 'You Are My Sunshine,' a big house with blue shutters." She trailed off, looking scared. "Mr. Thompson says I'm making things up, that the medicine will help me stop imagining things." Rachel's blood ran cold. The house Emily described matched the Morrison estate perfectly. She'd seen it in magazine features. These weren't hallucinations, they were memories, possibly genetic memories passed down through the rare condition both Emily and Sarah shared. Later that evening, Rachel stayed late to investigate further. She discovered that Emily's vitamin regimen included experimental drugs designed to suppress memory formation. The doses had been steadily increasing over the past few months, coinciding with Emily's growing remembrance of details from Sarah's life. A knock at her office door made her jump. Linda Parker stood there, her aged face grave. "You figured it out, haven't right?" the nurse asked softly, closing the door behind her. "About Emily and Sarah." Rachel nodded, her throat tight. "The genetic marker, the memories, the suppression drugs. How long have you known?" Linda sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 72 years. "Since the beginning. Sarah made me promise to protect her daughter, but I couldn't stop them from experimenting on her. The best I could do was switch her medication, document everything." She pulled out a worn notebook from her pocket. "We need to tell James Morrison, but we have to be careful. Robert Wilson has people everywhere, and if he discovers we know." The implications hung heavy in the air. Rachel thought about the other children who'd disappeared from Rosehaven, about the experimental drugs, about the massive payments from Wilson Pharmaceuticals. Emily's condition. They're using her as a test subject, aren't they? Testing memory suppression drugs under the guise of treating her genetic condition. Linda's eyes filled with tears. Sarah discovered what her ex-husband was doing, using orphan children to test experimental drugs. That's why. That's why she had to die. And now Emily, the old nurse's voice broke. Rachel made a decision. We need to get her medical records to James Morrison. All of them, Sarah's, Emily's, and the other children's. But if we do this wrong, we'll sign their death warrants, Linda finished grimly. Wilson's pharmaceutical empire is built on these experiments. He'll do anything to keep this quiet. Looking at Emily's medical file on her computer screen, Rachel felt the weight of responsibility crushing her. One wrong move could doom not just Emily, but every child at Rosehaven. Yet doing nothing meant allowing these experiments to continue, letting Emily suffer the same fate as her mother. Tomorrow, Rachel said finally. James Morrison is visiting tomorrow for the Foundation's monthly review. We'll find a way to tell him everything. The meeting at St. Michael's Church took place in the shadowy confines of the confessional booth. Linda's hands clutched a worn leather journal as she waited for James Morrison to arrive. Through the latticed window, she watched him enter the church, his businessman's confidence replaced by cautious uncertainty. Mr. Morrison, she whispered when he took his seat on the other side, what I'm about to tell you must remain between us. Lives depend on it. Emily's life depends on it. She slid Sarah's journal through the small opening between them. This was your wife's. She left it in my care 8 years ago, the day before she died. James's sharp intake of breath echoed in the confined space. Why are you showing me this now? His voice trembled slightly as he recognized Sarah's handwriting. Because Emily isn't just any orphan, Mr. Morrison. She's Sarah's daughter. Linda paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Sarah was married before you to Robert Wilson. When she discovered she was pregnant, she also uncovered something terrible about Wilson's pharmaceutical research. He gave her an ultimatum: terminate the pregnancy or disappear forever. The confessional booth creaked as James shifted. Sarah never told me about a previous marriage. About a child. She couldn't. Wilson's lawyers made her sign ironclad non-disclosure agreements. She chose to have Emily in secret, arranging a private adoption through Rosehaven. I helped her hide everything: the pregnancy, the birth, the arrangements. She visited Emily whenever she could, planning to tell you everything once she had enough evidence against Wilson. Linda's voice cracked as she continued. The night she died, Sarah had finally gathered proof of Wilson's illegal drug trials on orphan children. She was coming to Rosehaven to get Emily, planning to take both of you and run, but she never made it. James sat in stunned silence, pages rustling as he read Sarah's journal. These entries, about the precious secret she had to protect. She meant Emily. Yes, and now Wilson knows Emily exists. The genetic condition she shares with Sarah, it's incredibly rare. When Emily started showing symptoms, Thompson reported it to Wilson. They've been using her as a test subject, experimenting with memory suppression drugs to ensure she never remembers her connection to Sarah. Linda pulled out more documents, medical records, photographs, secret correspondence. I've been collecting evidence for years, waiting for the right moment. But we're running out of time. Thompson's reports show the drugs are failing. Emily's memories are breaking through. Wilson won't risk exposure. He'll have her transferred like the others. Others? James's voice had turned hard. Other children used in Wilson's trials. They disappear, Mr. Morrison. No records, no traces. Just gone. Linda's voice shook. Sarah died trying to expose this. Now, Emily shows the same determination, the same spirit that made Sarah dangerous to them. They'll silence her too unless we act. James was quiet for a long moment. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Fear, Linda admitted. Wilson's reach is extensive. The police, child services, even some judges, they're all in his pocket. Sarah tried going through official channels, Look what happened to her, she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. But when I saw you recognize Emily that night, I knew it was time. You had the resources, the influence to protect her. Sarah believed in you. In her last entry, she wrote that if anything happened to her, you were the only one who could keep Emily safe. The church bells tolled 8 times, startling them both. There's more. Linda whispered urgently, but we can't risk being seen together too long. Read Sarah's journal. The last few entries contain coded messages, names, dates, account numbers. She was building a case against Wilson. But be careful where you read it. They're watching you now. Just like they watched her. As James stood to leave, Linda grabbed his hand through the lattice. Mr. Morrison. James. Emily draws pictures of your house, describes rooms she's never seen. She hums Sarah's favorite songs. The drugs can't erase everything. She's remembering, piece by piece. Save her before it's too late. After James left, Linda remained in the confessional, praying for forgiveness, not for revealing the truth, but for keeping it hidden so long. Outside, a black SUV idled in the church parking lot, its occupants watching as James Morrison drove away, Sarah's journal secure in his briefcase. The morning after Linda's revelation, Rosehaven received an unexpected visitor. Robert Wilson's black Bentley rolled through the gates precisely at 8 a.m., sending the staff into a frenzy of nervous activity. Thompson, who had been berating a kitchen worker, transformed instantly into the gracious administrator, rushing to greet his benefactor. Wilson cut an imposing figure as he strode into the orphanage, tall, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than most staff members' yearly salary. His smile never reached his steel-grey eyes as he surveyed the facility. Quite a commotion here lately, I hear. James Morrison's taken a personal interest in our little establishment. Emily was in the middle of her breakfast when Wilson entered the dining hall. She froze mid-bite, a strange terror gripping her that she couldn't explain. Wilson's gaze swept the room, landing on her with calculated precision. For a moment, something flickered across his face: recognition, anger, or perhaps fear. "So, this is her," Wilson said softly, approaching Emily's table. The other children instinctively moved away, sensing the tension. "Hello, Emily. I'm Dr. Wilson. I've heard so much about you." His voice was gentle, but Emily shrank back, her small hands trembling. Linda, who had been watching from the doorway, intervened. "Emily needs to take her medication, sir." Doctor's orders. She moved to guide Emily away, but Wilson's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "The medication can wait," he said pleasantly, though his grip suggested otherwise. "I'd like to speak with Emily privately." Thompson, arranged, his tone left no room for argument. In Thompson's office, Wilson studied Emily like a specimen under glass. "You look just like your mother," he murmured, almost to himself. Emily's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Oh yes, I knew your mother quite well. Sarah was special. Just like you're special, Emily." The intercom buzzed, interrupting the tense moment. "Mr. Wilson, James Morrison is here for his scheduled visit." Thompson's voice carried a note of panic. Wilson's expression darkened momentarily before smoothing into a practiced smile. "Perfect timing," he said, straightening his tie. "I've been meaning to catch up with James. It's been, 8 years?" He turned to Emily. "We'll continue our chat later, my dear. So much to discuss." The confrontation in the hallway crackled with unspoken hostility. James stopped short at the sight of Wilson, his face draining of color before hardening into a mask of controlled fury. Wilson extended his hand with theatrical warmth. "James, how wonderful to see you. I heard you've taken quite an interest in our little Emily." James ignored the offered hand. "Robert, I wasn't aware you had connections to Rosehaven." His voice was arctic. The two men sized each other up like prizefighters before a match. "Oh, Wilson Pharmaceuticals has been Rosehaven's primary benefactor for years," Wilson replied smoothly. "We take our corporate responsibility very seriously. In fact, I was just discussing Emily's special medical needs with Thompson. Such a delicate situation requires." expert attention. The threat was subtle but clear. James's hands clenched at his sides. How fortunate that the Morrison Foundation has decided to increase our involvement here. We'll be implementing new oversight procedures, including independent medical reviews. Wilson's smile tightened fractionally. Careful, James. Some doors are better left closed. For everyone's sake, he glanced meaningfully toward Emily, who watched the exchange with growing fear. Interesting choice of words, James replied coldly. Sarah used to say the same thing about truth, that it finds its way through closed doors eventually. The mention of Sarah's name hit like a thunderbolt. Wilson's practiced facade cracked for just a moment, revealing something dark and dangerous beneath. Yes, Sarah always did have a peculiar relationship with truth, and look where it got her. The implied threat hung in the air like poison. Linda, who had been hovering nearby, quickly ushered Emily away as the tension escalated. Thompson nervously attempted to direct both men to his office, but neither moved. We should catch up properly, James Wilson said finally, his composure restored. Perhaps over dinner. So much to discuss about Rosehaven's future and its past. With a last meaningful look at Emily's retreating form, he turned and left, his footsteps echoing through the suddenly silent hallway. After Wilson's departure, Thompson found an envelope on his desk containing new treatment protocols for Emily, along with a reminder of his contractual obligations. In the kitchen, Martha discovered that all security footage from the morning had been mysteriously erased. And in her small office, Linda frantically copied the last of her evidence, knowing that time was running out. James spent the entire night in his home office, Sarah's journal spread before him alongside stacks of corporate records and newspaper archives. The more he read, the more his world tilted on its axis. Sarah's coded entries painted a horrifying picture of systematic abuse, corporate corruption, and a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Wilson Pharmaceuticals. Project Memory Sarah had written in careful cipher. Children as test subjects. No oversight, no ethics board. R thinks he's erasing trauma, but he's erasing them. The drugs don't just suppress memories, they destroy identity. God forgive me for ever being part of this. Detective Mark Reynolds arrived at midnight, carrying boxes of cold case files. I always knew something was off about the accident, he said, spreading photographs across James's desk. Look at these skid marks. The brake lines weren't just cut, they were deliberately severed in a way to make it look like wear and tear. This was professional work. Together, they pieced together Sarah's final months. She had meticulously documented everything: dates, locations, witness names. But most disturbing were the financial records she'd uncovered, showing millions flowing through shell companies into Rosehaven and similar facilities across the country. She was building a RICO case, Reynolds realized, studying the patterns: money laundering, human trafficking under the guise of adoptions, illegal drug trials. She knew Wilson's entire operation was built on experimenting on children who had no one to protect them. James found a hidden compartment in Sarah's old jewelry box, containing a USB drive and a letter addressed to him. My dearest James. It began, if you're reading this, I failed to protect our daughter. Yes, Emily is ours not by blood, but by choice. I wanted to tell you everything, but Wilson threatened to destroy you if I did. I thought I could gather enough evidence first, protect you both. I was wrong. The USB drive contained video recordings of Sarah's secret meetings with other whistleblowers, nurses, researchers, even a former Wilson Pharmaceuticals board member. All had since died in accidents or disappeared. Sarah had known the risks but kept pushing, driven by the need to save Emily and the other children. James hired private investigators to track down former Rosehaven residents. Most were untraceable, but a few were found in mental institutions, their memories fractured, their identities erased by years of experimental drugs. One survivor, now an adult, could only repeat, "The man with grey eyes says we must forget." A deep dive into Wilson Pharmaceuticals' research records revealed the true nature of Project Memory. Under the guise of treating childhood trauma, Wilson had developed drugs that could selectively erase memories. The military applications alone were worth billions, but the testing process was brutal, requiring years of trials on young, developing brains. He chose orphans because they were perfect test subjects, Linda explained during a clandestine meeting in James's car. No families to ask questions, no one to notice the changes. When the drugs worked too well, erasing everything instead of just targeted memories, the children were transferred to private facilities. They became ghosts. James discovered that Sarah had set up secret trust funds for several children, Emily included. The accounts were hidden behind layers of protection, scheduled to activate on specific dates. She'd thought of everything except Wilson's ruthlessness. Dr. Rachel Chen provided the final piece of the puzzle. The genetic condition Emily shares with Sarah, it makes them resistant to the memory drugs. Their brains can regenerate neural pathways that the drugs try to destroy. That's why Emily keeps remembering things she shouldn't know. And that's why Sarah was such a threat. She could prove the drugs didn't work as claimed. The investigation led James to a startling realization: Sarah's death hadn't just been about silencing her. Wilson had needed to separate her from Emily before the girl's memories of her mother became permanent. But he hadn't counted on genetics. The bond between mother and daughter went deeper than memory. James gathered the evidence into multiple secure locations, creating deadman switches that would expose everything if anything happened to him or Emily. But he knew evidence alone wasn't enough. Wilson had too much power, too many connections. Sarah tried working within the system. Reynolds warned, "Look what happened. We need a different approach." As dawn broke, James made a decision. He wouldn't repeat Sarah's mistake of trying to fight Wilson through legal channels. This time they would take the fight public, make it too big to bury. But first he had to get Emily to safety before Wilson realized just how much he was starting to remember. Emily's condition began deteriorating rapidly after Wilson's visit. Dr. Rachel Chen noticed the changes: first increased tremors, severe headaches, moments of confusion. The new treatment protocol demanded triple the previous dosage of memory suppression drugs, far exceeding any safe threshold. "She's fighting the medication," Linda whispered during a midnight examination. Emily lay curled on the infirmary bed, her small body racked with chills. The more they try to make her forget, the harder her mind fights to remember. They watched as Emily murmured in her feverish sleep, calling out for Mama and describing the garden with red roses she'd never seen. The symptoms grew more severe with each passing day. Emily's artwork, once filled with hidden clues about her memories, became chaotic and dark. Her drawings showed shadowy figures in white coats, needles that looked like fangs, and a woman with Sarah's face reaching out through bars. During art therapy, she drew the Morrison mansion in perfect detail, down to the color of the curtains in Sarah's old reading room. Thompson insisted on continuing the increased dosage despite Emily's adverse reactions. "Mr. Wilson's orders are clear," he snapped when Dr. Chen protested. "The girl's symptoms are unfortunate, but necessary for her treatment." That evening, Emily suffered her first seizure. James Morrison, making his daily visit, found Emily barely conscious in the infirmary. "What are they doing to her?" he demanded, watching her struggle to focus on his face. Linda pulled him aside, showing him the latest test results. "Her body is rejecting the drugs, but her mind is winning, Mr. Morrison. She's remembering more every day. This morning she asked me why the lady in her dreams called her my precious angel. That was Sarah's special name for her. Wilson's trying to erase Sarah completely. But he can't. The genetic connection is too strong." Emily's condition became a battleground between Wilson's agenda and her own resilient spirit. During brief moments of clarity, she would share fragments of memories that couldn't possibly be hers. "The garden has a broken fountain," she told James. Mama used to say the angels cried because they missed heaven. It was an exact quote from Sarah's journal describing the Morrison estate's garden. Dr. Chen documented everything meticulously, building a case for medical negligence. These drugs weren't designed for long-term use, she explained to James. They're experimental compounds meant for short-term memory modification. The sustained usage is causing neurological damage if we don't stop this soon. The crisis point came during a routine evening check. Emily began convulsing violently, her vital signs crashing. Linda and Dr. Chen worked desperately to stabilize her, while Thompson hovered nervously in the doorway, more concerned about calling Wilson than saving Emily. Her body can't take much more of this, Dr. Chen declared after Emily was finally stable. The drugs are killing her, and Wilson knows it. He's pushing the dosage because he's desperate to erase her memories before. She stopped abruptly, realizing she'd said too much. That night, Emily had a moment of startling clarity. I remember her, she whispered to James during his visit. She smelled like gardenias and sang "You Are My Sunshine." She cried when she left me here, but said it was to keep me safe. Why couldn't she keep me? Her questions tore at James's heart. Linda discovered Emily's secret diary hidden beneath her mattress. The entries were sporadic, but revealing the medicine makes my head fuzzy, but I keep seeing her face. Mr. Thompson says she's not real, that I'm making things up. But she feels real. She feels like mine. As Emily's health deteriorated, the staff began taking sides. Martha snuck her extra food to help her keep up her strength. Some nurses turned a blind eye when Linda forgot to administer the full dosage. Others, fearful of Wilson's influence, documented every deviation from the protocol. James watched helplessly as Emily grew weaker, torn between the need to protect her and the fear that any sudden moves would put her in greater danger. Sarah fought this battle too, Linda reminded him. But she fought alone. This time Emily has us. We just need to keep her alive long enough to expose the truth. The question was, could Emily survive her own awakening memories? Each recollection seemed to strengthen her spirit while weakening her body. She was caught in a desperate race between remembering and surviving, with Wilson determined to ensure she could do neither. David Carter, the investigative journalist, broke into the orphanage's basement archives on a moonless night, guided by Linda's detailed instructions. What he found exceeded his darkest suspicions. Row after row of filing cabinets contained records dating back 20 years, tracking not just treatments, but their effects on children systematically chosen for their lack of family connections. Subject 23 demonstrates complete memory erasure after 6 months. Read 1 file. Recommended for Phase 2 trials. A note in the margin added transferred to Facility B. No recovery of original personality observed. The clinical language couldn't disguise the horror, children being deliberately stripped of their identities. Further investigation revealed Rosehaven was just one node in a vast network. Wilson Pharmaceuticals had similar arrangements with orphanages across the country, all operating under different charitable foundations. The pattern was always the same: substantial donations, private medical facilities, and children who disappeared without trace. Martha Sullivan, cleaning Thompson's office after hours, discovered a hidden safe behind a painting. She couldn't access it, but she photographed the documents visible through the glass door: military contracts, payment schedules, and a list of research subjects. With Emily's name highlighted in red. Detective Reynolds, following the money trail, uncovered offshore accounts linking Rosehaven to a series of shell companies. Each company led back to Chimera Research, a Wilson Pharmaceuticals subsidiary specializing in memory modification therapy. The same subsidiary had funded the research that Sarah had been investigating before her death. Dr. Rachel Chen found more disturbing connections in the medical supplies. The vitamins given to selected children came in unmarked bottles, but the chemical composition matched experimental compounds listed in Wilson's classified patent applications. These drugs were being tested without FDA approval, without oversight, without any pretense of ethical constraints. James's private investigators discovered that several Rosehaven board members also sat on Wilson Pharmaceuticals' ethics committee, the same committee that had repeatedly buried concerns about drug trials on minors. The connection went deeper. Thompson himself had once been Wilson's research partner before being promoted to run Rosehaven. "It's a perfect system," Linda explained during another secret meeting. Wilson provides the drugs and funding, Thompson selects suitable test subjects, and the board ensures no one asks questions. When children show adverse reactions, they're transferred to private facilities owned by other Wilson subsidiaries. The paper trail disappears, and new subjects are brought in. The evidence painted a picture of industrial-scale exploitation. Wilson had turned orphanages into private research laboratories, using society's most vulnerable children to develop drugs with massive military and intelligence applications. The ability to selectively erase or modify memories was worth billions, and Wilson had found a way to conduct his research without oversight or consequences. Emily's case was different only because of her connection to Sarah. Wilson didn't just want to silence Sarah, Reynolds realized. He needed to eliminate any trace of her existence. Emily's memories of her mother are evidence that the drugs don't work as claimed. If she remembers, his entire house of cards collapses. The web of connections extended into law enforcement and child services. Officers who questioned Rosehaven's practices were transferred. Social workers who raised concerns found their careers derailed. Wilson had spent decades building a system that could operate in plain sight, protected by money, influence, and the public's indifference to orphaned children. James discovered that his own company's charitable foundation had unknowingly contributed to the scheme. Wilson had arranged for donations to be channeled through legitimate charities, making the money trail nearly impossible to follow. The revelation made him physically ill. He had helped fund the very system that had killed Sarah. Dr. Chen's research revealed the full scope of the experimentation. The drugs weren't just erasing traumatic memories, they were rewriting entire personalities. Children entered the program as individuals and emerged as blank slates, ready to be molded into whatever Wilson's military clients desired. Linda's records showed a pattern of escalating boldness. What began as therapeutic intervention for traumatized children had evolved into systematic experimentation. The dosages increased, the methods became more aggressive, and the successes were measured in shattered identities and erased lives. Lives. The deeper they dug, the more extensive the conspiracy appeared. Wilson hadn't just built a pharmaceutical empire, he'd created a shadow research network that turned society's unwanted children into test subjects, all under the guise of charitable work. The annual Wilson Pharmaceuticals Charity Gala provided the perfect stage for confrontation. The city's elite gathered at the Grand Plaza Hotel, celebrating Wilson's supposed philanthropy while sipping champagne worth more than a month's medication for any Rosehaven child. James Morrison arrived uninvited, Emily's latest medical reports tucked in his briefcase. Security tried to stop him, but his name and reputation forced them to defer to Wilson, who watched the interruption with calculated amusement from the podium. James. What an unexpected pleasure, Wilson announced into the microphone, his voice carrying across the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, James Morrison, one of our city's greatest philanthropists. Perhaps he'd like to say a few words about our work with disadvantaged children. James mounted the stage, ignoring the offered handshake. Yes, Robert, let's talk about children. Specifically, let's discuss Emily Walker from Rosehaven Orphanage and why she shares my late wife's genetic marker. The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Wilson's smile never wavered, but his eyes turned to ice. My dear James, grief can make us see connections that don't exist. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Like you discussed things privately with Sarah, James pulled out enlarged photographs of Emily's brain scans, holding them up for the crowd. Or should we discuss why you're testing experimental memory erasing drugs on orphan children? The crowd began murmuring. Reporters who had been dozing through another charity event suddenly sat up straight, cameras flashing. Wilson gestured for security, but James raised his voice. "Your drugs are killing her, Robert, just like you killed Sarah when she discovered your experiments." "That's enough." Wilson's composure cracked. "Security, remove Mr. Morrison. He's clearly unwell." "Ask him about Project Memory," James shouted as security approached. "Ask him why children keep disappearing from Rose Haven. Ask him what happened to Sarah Morrison when she found out." Wilson's next words sealed his fate. "Sarah signed away all rights to interfere with my research when she gave up our child." The admission slipped out in his anger, and he realized his mistake too late. The crowd gasped. James pressed his advantage. "So you admit Emily is Sarah's daughter? Your daughter? The one you forced Sarah to abandon, then used as a test subject for your drugs?" Each question hit like a physical blow, making Wilson step backward. Camera phones recorded everything as Wilson's mask crumbled. "You don't understand what's at stake," he snarled. "The military applications alone. Do you think they care about a few orphans? About one inconvenient child?" Sarah didn't understand either, and look what happened to her. The threat hung in the air, but James wasn't finished. He pulled out a final document, Sarah's last letter. Sarah understood perfectly. That's why she left evidence everywhere. In safety deposit boxes, with lawyers, with journalists. Dead man switches, Robert. Set to trigger if anything happens to Emily or me. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Reporters rushed the stage, cameras flashing. Wilson's security team tried to control the situation, but it was too late. The story was out, streaming live on hundreds of phones. "You're making a mistake," James Wilson hissed as they pulled him away. "There are forces involved you can't imagine, people who won't let this research be compromised." "You're right about one thing," James replied, loud enough for nearby reporters to hear. "I can't imagine the kind of person who'd experiment on children, who'd kill his own daughter's mother to hide his crimes, but I don't need to imagine I'm looking at him." As security escorted James out, he could hear Wilson trying to do damage control, spinning tales about misunderstandings and philanthropic research, but the seeds of doubt were planted. Within hours, the story would explode across social media. By morning, Wilson Pharmaceuticals stock would plummet. Outside the hotel, Detective Reynolds waited with a team of FBI agents. The evidence they'd gathered, combined with tonight's public confession, was enough for search warrants. The raid on Rose Haven and Wilson's other facilities would begin at dawn. James knew the fight wasn't over. Wilson's influence ran deep, and desperate men were dangerous. But for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt her presence, guiding him toward justice. The truth was out, and no amount of memory-erasing drugs could make people forget what they'd witnessed tonight. The morning after the gala, Wilson's media machine launched its counterattack. Headlines screamed: Tech billionaire's mental health crisis, James Morrison's public meltdown, and grief-stricken widower harasses philanthropist. Cable news channels ran footage of James's confrontation on loop, carefully edited to make him appear unhinged. Wilson's PR team crafted a masterful narrative: a wealthy man broken by his wife's death, fixating on an innocent orphan girl. They dug up old photos of James in the months after Sarah's death, looking haggard and desperate. Paid psychology experts appeared on morning shows, discussing the dangers of transference and projection in grief. Mr. Morrison's actions, while understandable given his tragic loss, pose a serious threat to the children at Rose Haven, Wilson declared in a press conference, his voice dripping with manufactured concern. His obsession with young Emily Walker has disrupted her vital medical treatment and caused significant emotional distress. The character assassination was methodical. Anonymous sources leaked stories about James's erratic behavior at board meetings. Business rivals suddenly remembered concerning incidents. Even James's charitable work was weaponized, painted as the actions of a man trying to buy his way past guilt. Linda Parker watched in horror as Thompson gave interviews praising Wilson's contributions to Rose Haven. Without Dr. Wilson's generous support, we couldn't provide the specialized care these troubled children need, he told reporters gathered outside the orphanage. Behind him, security guards prevented anyone from entering the building or speaking to the children. Dr. Rachel Chen faced her own media crucifixion when she tried to speak out about Emily's medical condition. Wilson's lawyers threatened her with lawsuits for violating patient confidentiality. Medical boards suddenly launched investigations into her practice. Her hospital received anonymous complaints questioning her competency. The social media battleground turned toxic. Paid trolls flooded comment sections with conspiracy theories about James's company, Morrison Technologies. Stock manipulators spread rumors about financial irregularities. Each attempt to defend himself only gave Wilson's team more ammunition. Look at these children. Wilson's newest ad campaign showed smiling faces at Rose Haven. Look at the hope we've given them. Should we let one man's tragic obsession destroy years of vital medical research? The ads ran constantly, hammering home the message that James was the threat, not Wilson. Detective Reynolds found himself suddenly reassigned to traffic duty when he tried to reopen Sarah's case. His replacement quickly announced that a review showed no new evidence of foul play. The message was clear: the system would protect its own. James watched his reputation crumble with growing despair. Investors began pulling out of Morrison Technologies. Charitable organizations distanced themselves from his foundation. Even old friends stopped returning his calls, afraid of being tainted by association. But in the midst of the media onslaught, unexpected allies emerged. Former Rose Haven residents began sharing their stories anonymously online. Hospital staff leaked records of children admitted with mysterious symptoms matching Wilson's drug trials. Retired employees of Wilson Pharmaceuticals started asking questions about past research protocols. Martha Sullivan, the orphanage cook, risked her job to smuggle out videos of Emily's deteriorating condition. The footage of the 7-year-old girl, shaking and confused after her treatments, cut through the carefully crafted narrative of proper medical care. David Carter published a series of investigative articles linking Wilson to other mysterious deaths besides Sarah's. Each story was met with legal threats and smear campaigns, but he persisted, building a case piece by piece. The turning point came when Emily herself managed to record a message on Linda's phone during one of her lucid moments. "I remember my mum," she said simply. "I remember the garden and the songs and how she cried when she left me here. Mr. Wilson says the medicine will make me forget, but I don't want to forget anymore." The video went viral despite Wilson's attempts to suppress it. Social media users began questioning the official narrative. Why was a pharmaceutical company so invested in one orphan's medical treatment? Why were there no records of other children who'd received similar care? As public opinion slowly shifted, Wilson's attacks grew more desperate. False accusations, doctored photographs, and increasingly bizarre conspiracy theories filled the airwaves. But with each overreach, more people began to see through the manipulation. James endured it all, focusing on the only thing that mattered: protecting Emily. When reporters asked about the damage to his reputation, he had one response: "Sarah died trying to save our daughter. I can survive a few bad headlines to finish what she started." Linda Parker knew she was being followed the moment she left Rose Haven that evening. The black SUV had been parked across the street all day, its tinted windows concealing the occupants who tracked her every move. As she drove home, her rear-view mirror confirmed her fears. They were keeping pace, staying just far enough back to avoid suspicion. Her hands trembled as she unlocked her small cottage, remembering Sarah's last words: "If anything happens to me, the evidence is in the garden." Linda had spent 8 years tending those rose bushes, knowing they guarded a truth worth dying for. Tonight she felt death's shadow drawing closer. The first warning came as a brick through her window, wrapped in a note: "Accidents happen to nosy nurses." Linda barely flinched, having expected this since she'd given James the diary. She'd already moved her most important documents to secure locations, distributed among trusted friends with instructions to release everything if she disappeared. Thompson summoned her to his office the next morning, his false concern more threatening than any open hostility. "Linda, dear, you've seemed stressed lately. Perhaps it's time to consider retirement. Wilson Pharmaceuticals has an excellent pension plan for long-term employees who understand the importance of discretion." She thought of Emily, lying in the infirmary, fighting against the drugs that were meant to erase her mother from her mind. "I'm quite happy with my current position, Mr. Thompson," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Someone needs to look after these children." That night her brakes failed on the drive home. Only her habit of testing them at the end of her driveway saved her life. The mechanic she called, an old friend, confirmed they'd been tampered with. "Just like Sarah Morrison's car," he whispered, before refusing to speak further. Linda began varying her routine, never leaving work at the same time, taking different routes home. She installed security cameras, though she knew they wouldn't stop determined attackers. Each night she updated her records, making copies, sending encrypted files to journalists and lawyers. The second attack came at the grocery store, a random mugging that left her with bruised ribs and a clear message: "Next time, you won't walk away." The police took her report with obvious disinterest, one officer openly reading from a script about unfortunate random crime. "Dr. Rachel Chen found her in the infirmary, cataloging Emily's symptoms. They're watching my house too," Rachel confided. "But we can't stop now. Emily's starting to remember everything, and Wilson's getting desperate." A late-night call from James Morrison confirmed her fears. "They tried to hack my servers tonight," he told her. "Looking for the evidence you gave me. Linda, let me send security to protect you." But Linda refused protection. "I'm more useful to Emily here," she insisted. "They won't move against me openly, not while I'm still caring for her. The moment they do, everything comes out." She was right about not being attacked openly. Instead, they tried to destroy her professionally. Anonymous complaints to the nursing board, accusations of medication errors, suggestions that her age was affecting her competency. Each attack reinforced her determination to see this through. One night, working late, she heard footsteps in the supposedly empty orphanage. Moving silently through darkened corridors, she witnessed Thompson and his security team removing files from the basement archives. She documented everything, adding to the evidence that would eventually expose them. The final warning came in the form of a phone call from Robert Wilson himself. "You're playing a dangerous game." Linda, his smooth voice, carried years of practiced menace. "Sarah thought she could beat me too. Think about how that ended." Linda's response surprised even her with its calmness. "I think about Sarah every day, Mr. Wilson. I think about how she trusted me to protect her daughter. So here's my message: if anything happens to me, everything comes out. Every file, every record, every detail about what you've done to these children. My death will be your downfall." That night, Linda sat in her garden, among the roses that concealed Sarah's final evidence. She wasn't afraid anymore. She'd lived a long life, seen too much to fear death. Her only concern now was ensuring Emily's safety. She wrote one last letter, to be delivered to James if the worst happened. Sarah knew the risks when she opposed Wilson. So do I. But some truths demand sacrifice. Emily is the key to exposing everything. Keep her safe. Let her remember, the truth in her mind is more powerful than any evidence I've gathered. As she sealed the letter, Linda smiled, thinking of Sarah. "I kept my promise," she whispered to the night air. "Now it's time to finish what you started." The crisis came without warning. Emily collapsed during breakfast, her small body convulsing violently as the memory suppression drugs finally overwhelmed her system. Martha, the cook, screamed for help while Linda rushed from the infirmary, her years of medical training taking over despite her terror. "She's crashing," Dr. Rachel Chen shouted, already performing CPR as Thompson hovered anxiously in the doorway, his phone pressed to his ear. "We need to get her to a real hospital now." The other children watched in horror as their friends' lips turned blue. her consciousness slipping away despite Linda and Rachel's desperate efforts. James Morrison arrived at Cedar Heights Memorial Hospital just as the ambulance pulled in. Emily looked impossibly small on the gurney, surrounded by paramedics shouting medical terms that made his blood run cold. Severe neural inflammation. Respiratory distress. Unknown chemical compounds in her system. But the emergency room erupted into controlled chaos. Wilson's influence reached even here. Several doctors suddenly found urgent reasons to be elsewhere when they saw the patient's name. But Dr. Sarah Chen, Rachel's sister and the head of pediatric neurology, took charge, her face grim as she reviewed Emily's symptoms. "These readings are off the charts," she muttered, studying the brain scans. "The drugs are causing massive synaptic disruption. It's like her memories are literally fighting against the chemical suppression, and her brain is caught in the crossfire." Thompson appeared with a team of lawyers, wielding documents that claimed legal authority over Emily's treatment. "Ms. Walker is a ward of Rosehaven Orphanage," they insisted. "We have protocols in place." "Your protocols are killing her," Rachel exploded, brandishing Emily's medical records. "Look at these toxicity levels. One more dose of your treatment could cause permanent brain damage or death." James, watching through the ICU window, felt helpless rage as Emily's small chest rose and fell with the help of machines. Linda stood beside him, her voice breaking as she shared Sarah's final predictions. She knew this might happen. The drugs work by suppressing neural pathways, but Emily's genetic condition causes her brain to fight back, creating new connections. It's killing her because she can't forget. The hospital became a battleground. Wilson's lawyers arrived with court orders demanding Emily's transfer to a specialized facility. James's legal team countered with emergency injunctions. Outside, reporters gathered, drawn by rumors of a connection between the orphan girl and Sarah Morrison's death. Inside Emily's room, monitors beeped steadily as Linda and Rachel took turns watching over her. During brief moments of consciousness, Emily would mumble fragments of memories: Sarah's garden, the songs she used to sing, details she couldn't possibly know unless they were somehow encoded in her DNA, passed from mother to daughter. Dr. Sarah Chen worked through the night, consulting with specialists worldwide about Emily's unique case. "Her brain chemistry is unlike anything I've seen," she reported. "The interaction between her genetic condition and these experimental compounds. It's like her memories are physically fighting to survive." James sat by Emily's bedside, holding her tiny hand, remembering how Sarah used to say that love was stronger than any chemical, any force on earth. Now, watching Emily battle for her life and her memories, he understood what she'd meant. The breaking point came when Wilson himself appeared at the hospital, all smooth concern and veiled threats. "This is a delicate situation," he told the assembled press. "The girl's condition requires specialized care that only our facilities can provide." But as his security team moved to take Emily, her monitors suddenly screamed in alarm, her body arched in seizure, her brain activity spiking off the charts. In that moment of crisis, Emily's eyes flew open, focusing on Wilson with startling clarity. "You killed my mum," she said clearly, before slipping back into unconsciousness. The words, caught on dozens of phones and cameras, would soon explode across social media, destroying Wilson's carefully crafted narrative. The day after Emily's hospitalization, Wilson launched his most devastating counterattack. Armed with falsified medical records and expert testimonies bought with pharmaceutical money, he secured an emergency court order granting Rosehaven complete control over Emily's medical care. James watched helplessly as private security guards took up positions outside Emily's hospital room, preventing him from entering. The court order painted him as a dangerous obsessive, citing his emotional instability and interference with necessary medical treatment as grounds for a restraining order. "We deeply regret having to take such drastic measures," Thompson told the press, his voice dripping with rehearsed concern. But Mr. Morrison's irrational fixation on this child has disrupted her vital treatment protocol. His unfounded accusations against Dr. Wilson have caused immeasurable harm to our institution's reputation and, more importantly, to Emily's recovery. The media turned on James with savage intensity. His past statements about Sarah's death were re-examined and twisted. Business rivals emerged with stories of erratic behavior in board meetings. Even his charitable work was recast as evidence of a troubled mind obsessed with replacing his lost wife. Morrison Technologies' stock plummeted as investors fled. Board members, sensing blood in the water, called for an emergency meeting to discuss his leadership. Longtime allies suddenly became unreachable. The empire he'd built over decades began crumbling in a matter of days. Dr. Rachel Chen was suspended pending an investigation into medical misconduct. Linda Parker was forced into immediate retirement, escorted from Rosehaven by security guards as Thompson cited concerns about her mental competency. Even Detective Reynolds found himself relegated to desk duty. His investigation into Sarah's death officially closed again. "You have to understand," James, his lawyer, explained during a late-night meeting, "Wilson's legal team has crafted an airtight narrative. They've painted you as a grieving widower who's projected his loss onto an innocent child. Every attempt you make to fight this only reinforces their story." The final blow came when Wilson Pharmaceuticals announced a revolutionary new treatment for childhood trauma using the very drugs they'd tested on Emily and other orphans. The stock market responded enthusiastically, and media attention shifted to celebrating Wilson's humanitarian breakthrough. James sat alone in his mansion, surrounded by Sarah's belongings, watching his life's work disintegrate. The evidence they'd gathered, the witness testimonies, the paper trails, all of it meaningless against Wilson's power to shape the narrative. Even Emily's own words were dismissed as the result of psychological manipulation by an unstable adult. Security cameras tracked his every move, installed by his own board of directors to ensure his well-being. His phones were monitored, his emails screened, his visitors logged and questioned. The prison of wealth and privilege he'd built became his cage. Linda managed to smuggle one last message to him through Martha: "Emily still fights. While she remembers, hope remains." But even this small comfort was tainted by the knowledge that Emily lay in a hospital bed, once again under Wilson's control, being pumped full of drugs designed to erase her mother from her mind. The press camped outside his gates, hungry for signs of the tech billionaire's breakdown each time he left the house. Cameras followed, analyzing his every expression for evidence of instability. His silence was called brooding, his determination labeled obsession. In the end, it was Sarah's own words that kept him going. He reread her final letter each night. "The truth fights hardest when it's most threatened. Stand firm, my love. Some battles are won by outlasting the storm." The first crack in Wilson's facade came from an unexpected source. Jessica Thompson, Michael Thompson's wife, stumbled drunk into a local news station late one night, clutching a USB drive and decades of guilt. Years of living with the knowledge of what happened at Rosehaven had finally broken her. The children, she sobbed to the startled news anchor. "I can't stay silent about the children anymore." The USB drive contained years of detailed financial records, payments for each child selected for treatment, bonuses for successful memory suppression, compensation for families who asked too many questions. Within hours of Jessica's confession, more revelations followed. Martha Sullivan, the orphanage cook, released her secret recordings of late-night conversations between Thompson and Wilson's representatives. The clinical discussions of dosage adjustments and subject compliance painted a chilling picture of systematic abuse. Former Rosehaven staff members, freed from their non-disclosure agreements by evidence of criminal conduct, began coming forward. Night guards described mysterious midnight transfers, children loaded into unmarked vans, never to be seen again. Maintenance workers testified about renovating the basement into a testing facility, installing medical equipment that no orphanage should need. Dr. Rachel Chen, despite her suspension, published her complete medical findings online. The technical analysis of Wilson's drug trials showed a pattern of escalating experimentation using increasingly dangerous compounds on younger and more vulnerable children. Her report included brain scans showing the devastating neural damage caused by long-term memory suppression. Detective Reynolds, working with FBI agents who'd been quietly building their own case, executed search warrants on multiple Wilson Pharmaceuticals facilities. They discovered a network of rehabilitation centers where failed test subjects were held, their minds fractured by years of chemical manipulation. Linda Parker's meticulous records provided the skeleton key that connected everything. Her coded diaries contained dates, names, drug protocols, and most damning of all, direct orders from Wilson himself authorizing the use of experimental compounds on children without consent or oversight. The most shocking evidence came from the children themselves. As Wilson's drug supply was cut off, young residents of Rose Haven began remembering. They drew pictures of the special room in the basement, wrote stories about the medicine that makes you forget, and asked questions about friends who had disappeared. Thompson, seeing the walls closing in, attempted to destroy evidence in his office. But Martha had already photographed every document, every file, every record of his complicity. When FBI agents arrested him, they found him frantically shredding papers, muttering about necessary sacrifices for scientific progress. International media descended on Rose Haven, broadcasting images of FBI teams carrying out boxes of evidence. Former employees gave interviews describing Wilson's visits, his personal selection of test subjects, his cold insistence on pushing dosages beyond safe limits. Medical experts analyzing the seized data were horrified. Wilson hadn't just been testing memory suppression drugs, he'd been developing techniques to completely rewrite children's personalities, creating blank slates that could be programmed according to his client's specifications. The overseas connections emerged next. Wilson had been selling his breakthrough treatments to foreign governments and private military contractors. The ability to erase and rebuild memories was worth billions in the world of espionage and psychological warfare. Sarah Morrison's death took on new significance as her research notes were finally decoded. She had discovered not just the drug trials, but Wilson's ultimate goal, developing a method to permanently alter human consciousness using orphaned children as his unwitting test subjects. Emily's case, which had seemed unique, proved to be the key to understanding Wilson's entire operation. Her genetic resistance to the memory drugs inherited from Sarah had frustrated his attempts at complete control. Every failed attempt to suppress her memories had pushed him to develop stronger compounds, leading to increasingly dangerous experiments on other children. As federal agents shut down Rose Haven and similar facilities across the country, the full scope of Wilson's crimes became clear. Hundreds of children had been subjected to unauthorized drug trials. Dozens had disappeared into a network of secret facilities. An unknown number had died, their deaths disguised as transfers or adoptions. The evidence Linda had protected for 8 years, combined with James's resources and Rachel's medical documentation, formed an irrefutable case. Wilson's empire of pharmaceutical manipulation and child exploitation crumbled in a matter of days, exposed to the harsh light of public scrutiny. The turning point came from beyond the grave. Sarah's final safeguard activated exactly 8 years after her death, just as she had planned. Multiple law firms simultaneously received encrypted files, each containing a piece of her elaborate puzzle. The dead woman's testimony exploded across the internet, impossible to suppress or discredit. Sarah's video testimony, recorded in the months before her death, was devastating in its detail. "If you're watching this," she began, her face showing the strain of her secret burden, "then Robert Wilson has done exactly what I feared. But I've made sure the truth can't stay buried forever." The evidence she'd gathered was meticulous. Financial records showed Wilson using Rose Haven and similar orphanages as fronts for unauthorized drug trials. Email exchanges revealed his direct orders to increase dosages beyond safe levels. Surveillance footage captured his late-night visits to monitor progress on particularly promising subjects. Most damning was Sarah's personal documentation of Emily's early life. My daughter. She wrote, "Born of my first marriage to Robert Wilson, he wanted me to terminate the pregnancy when I discovered his experiments. Instead, I chose to hide her to give her a chance at life. My biggest regret is not being able to keep her with me, but Wilson's threats made that impossible." The diary entries painted a horrifying picture of Sarah's last months. She'd discovered Wilson testing memory-altering drugs on orphan children, using their vulnerability and lack of family connections to avoid oversight. When she threatened to expose him, he began systematically destroying her credibility, just as he would later do to James. Robert believes he's working for a greater good, Sarah recorded. He talks about advancing human consciousness, about helping people forget trauma. But I've seen the failed experiments, the children whose minds he's destroyed. He calls them necessary sacrifices for progress. Linda's testimony corroborated everything. She produced letters Sarah had written detailing Wilson's escalating threats. He says he'll destroy James's company if I talk one letter read. He says he'll make sure I never see Emily again. But I can't stay silent knowing what he's doing to these children. The technical documentation Sarah had gathered proved crucial. She'd secretly copied research data showing the true effects of Wilson's drugs: permanent neural damage, personality disintegration, complete identity loss. Her notes revealed that Emily's genetic condition inherited from Sarah made her resistant to memory suppression, which had turned her into Wilson's most frustrating test subject. James watched the video testimony with tears streaming down his face. Sarah's final message to him explained everything. "My darling, I knew they might kill me to keep this secret. That's why I've arranged for all of this to come out after enough time has passed for Emily's memories to stabilize. Her mind is special, James. She'll remember me. Despite everything they do to make her forget, find her. Protect her. Help her remember." The Deadman switch Sarah had created was brilliantly designed. If Wilson had left Emily alone, the evidence might have stayed buried. But his obsession with erasing Sarah's daughter's memories had triggered exactly the scenario Sarah had planned for. Each time they increased the dosage. Sarah's research notes explained, Emily's brain creates new pathways to preserve the memories they're trying to erase. The harder they push, the stronger her mind fights back. She's living proof that their memory suppression technology doesn't work as claimed, and that's why Wilson can never let her remember. The final piece of Sarah's evidence was a recording of Wilson himself, captured during their last confrontation. His voice, cold and calculating, laid out exactly what would happen if she exposed his work. Accidents can be arranged. Sarah, James's company can be destroyed. Emily can disappear into the system. Don't test me. As Sarah's evidence spread across the internet, impossible to contain, her voice reached out from the past to protect the daughter she'd died trying to save. The truth she'd sacrificed everything to expose was finally free. The floodgates opened after Sarah's evidence became public. Former Rosehaven residents, scattered across the country, began sharing their stories. Their testimonies painted a horrifying picture of systematic abuse masked as medical treatment, each account adding another piece to the puzzle Sarah had died trying to expose. Marcus Jensen, now 23, was the first to come forward. "I was 7 when the special treatments began," he testified in a viral video. "They told me the medicine would help me forget the trauma of losing my parents. Instead, it made me forget who I was. There are entire years of my life that are just gone." His medical records, obtained by FBI investigators, showed escalating doses of experimental compounds matching those used on Emily. Sophia Torres, aged 19, appeared on national television, her hands shaking as she described the basement laboratory. "They took us down there at night," she recalled. "The room with the bright lights and strange machines. Dr. Wilson would visit, watching through the observation window as they injected us with different versions of the drugs. Some kids never came back up. Twin brothers David and Michael Carter, now teenagers, shared journals they'd kept hidden during their time at Rosehaven. The entries documented their gradual memory loss, the confusion and fear as their minds began to fragment. "Today I forgot my mother's face," one entry read. "David says she had red hair, but I can't remember. They say the medicine is helping, but why does helping hurt so much?" Sarah Chen, a former resident who'd managed to escape during a transfer, provided crucial testimony about the rehabilitation centers where failed test subjects were sent. They weren't hospitals, she explained. They were storage facilities for kids whose minds had been broken by the experiments, kids who couldn't remember their own names, who had to be taught basic functions all over again. The most heartbreaking testimony came from Jamie Williams, now 12, who had shared a room with Emily. She used to wake up crying, talking about a beautiful lady in her dreams, Jamie recalled. Mr. Thompson would get angry, increase her medicine, but Emily kept remembering. She told me sometimes love is stronger than any drug. Former staff members added their voices to the chorus. A night nurse described children screaming during treatment sessions, begging not to forget their families. A janitor revealed hidden rooms where records of failed experiments were stored. A kitchen worker told of smuggling food to children too traumatized to eat in the dining hall. Dr. Rachel Chen compiled the testimonies into a comprehensive report correlating each account with medical records and drug trial data. The pattern was clear. Wilson had systematically targeted children with no family connections, using their isolation to conduct experiments that would never have passed ethical review. "They chose us because no one would miss us," explained Olivia Martinez, now an adult struggling with permanent memory issues. "No parents to ask questions, no families to notice the changes. We were perfect test subjects because we were invisible." The survivors formed a support group, sharing strategies for dealing with the gaps in their memories, the nightmares, the constant fear of forgetting more. They called themselves Sarah's Children in honor of the woman who had died trying to save them. Each testimony strengthened the case against Wilson. The children's stories corroborated Sarah's evidence, providing first-hand accounts of experiments she had documented. Their experiences matched the technical data in her files, proving the systematic nature of Wilson's research. The most powerful moment came when several survivors visited Emily in the hospital. Despite never having met her, they felt a connection to the girl whose mother had tried to stop their suffering. "You're not alone anymore," they told her. "We remember too, and we won't let them make us forget again." The tide of public opinion turned with tsunami force. Wilson's carefully constructed image as a philanthropic businessman shattered under the weight of undeniable evidence. The media outlets that had once vilified James Morrison now scrambled to feature exposures on Wilson Pharmaceuticals' decades of unethical experimentation. Social media exploded with Justice for Sarah and Rosehaven survivors hashtags. Videos of Emily's hospital room testimony went viral, shared millions of times alongside clips from Sarah's Deadman switch evidence. Public outrage grew as more details emerged about the systematic abuse of society's most vulnerable children. The legal battle intensified on multiple fronts. Federal prosecutors filed RICO charges against Wilson and his top executives, alleging a massive criminal enterprise masked as pharmaceutical research. State attorneys general launched investigations into every facility connected to Wilson's network. International authorities began probing his overseas operations. Wilson's legal team, once seemingly invincible, started cracking under pressure. Junior lawyers facing potential accessory charges began cooperating with prosecutors. Paralegals turned over documents they'd been ordered to destroy. Even Wilson's longtime personal attorney requested immunity in exchange for testimony. Thompson broke first during interrogation. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of taking the fall alone, he detailed Wilson's entire operation. His confession revealed how they had selected vulnerable children, falsified medical records, and disposed of evidence when experiments went wrong. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit uncovered elaborate money laundering schemes used to fund the illegal research. Shell companies, offshore accounts, and falsified charitable donations had created a web of corruption that stretched from Rosehaven to the highest levels of corporate and government power. Class action lawsuits emerged as more survivors came forward. Law firms that had once represented Wilson now competed to represent his victims. The testimony of former Rosehaven residents, combined with Sarah's meticulous documentation, created an insurmountable wall of evidence. Wilson's pharmaceutical empire began to crumble. Shareholders filed suits alleging securities fraud. Research partners distanced themselves from his companies. Military contracts were suspended pending investigation. The stock price plummeted as investors fled the toxic brand. Medical boards launched reviews of every drug patent connected to Wilson's research. Professional associations revoked honors and awards. Universities that had received his donations began scrubbing his name from buildings and programs. The media narrative completed its reversal. James Morrison was no longer portrayed as an unstable widow, but as a grieving husband who had fought to finish his wife's crusade for justice. His temporary defeat was recast as part of a larger story of persistence against corporate evil. Emily became the face of the survivors' movement. Her resilience, her genetic resistance to the memory drugs, and her connection to Sarah made her story particularly compelling. Public support poured in as people learned how this 7-year-old had fought to keep her memories of a mother she'd barely known. Legal experts predicted years of litigation, but the court of public opinion had already reached its verdict. Wilson's attempts to maintain his innocence fell flat against the mountain of evidence and personal testimony. His own recorded words, preserved by Sarah, condemned him more effectively than any prosecutor could. The orphanage oversight system faced intense scrutiny. Government agencies launched investigations into how Wilson had been able to operate his scheme for so long. Reform proposals focused on increasing transparency and protection for vulnerable children. Healthcare watchdogs began examining other pharmaceutical companies' research practices. Wilson's exposure sparked a broader conversation about medical ethics, patient consent, and the exploitation of vulnerable populations in drug trials. But as legal proceedings intensified, Wilson's former allies abandoned him. Corporate partners cancelled contracts. Political connections evaporated. The wall of influence and intimidation he had built over decades collapsed in a matter of weeks. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension as Robert Wilson stood trial for his crimes. The prosecution's case, built on Sarah's evidence and survivor testimony, was devastating. Video screens showed recordings of Wilson's own words, his clinical discussions of acceptable losses, in pursuit of scientific progress, making jurors visibly recoil. Emily's testimony, delivered via video to protect her still fragile health, moved many to tears. "I remember my mother now," she stated simply. "The medicine couldn't make me forget her love." Wilson's facade finally cracked as he watched his own daughter dismantle his defense with the genetic resilience she'd inherited from Sarah. Thompson testified for 3 days, detailing decades of criminal conspiracy. His meticulous record-keeping, intended to protect himself, became a roadmap of Wilson's crimes. Each file, each memo, each recorded conversation added another brick to the wall of evidence. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Wilson was found guilty on all counts: conspiracy, medical fraud, child endangerment, and second-degree murder in Sarah's death. As the verdicts were read, Linda Parker squeezed James's hand, whispering, "Sarah can rest now." Additional indictments followed. Thompson received 20 years for his role in the conspiracy. Wilson Pharmaceuticals executives faced charges for fraud and conspiracy. Government officials who had enabled the scheme were prosecuted for corruption. The judge's sentencing statement was scathing. "You preyed upon society's most vulnerable members," she told Wilson. "You stole not just their memories, but their very identities. The court sentences you to life imprisonment without possibility of parole." Rosehaven was permanently closed, its records seized as evidence. Other facilities in Wilson's network were shuttered, their young residents transferred to legitimate care facilities. A federal task force was established to track down and assist survivors of Wilson's experiments. The Morrison Foundation, partnering with child advocacy groups, established a support fund for former test subjects. Medical teams developed treatments to help survivors cope with the lasting effects of Wilson's drugs. Counseling programs were created specifically for those struggling to rebuild fractured memories. James watched Wilson being led away in handcuffs, feeling not triumph but a deep, quiet sense of completion. Sarah's last battle was finally won. Justice, so long delayed, had finally been served. In the spring sunshine of the Morrison estate's garden, Emily sat among the roses her mother had once tended. Her recovery had been gradual but steady since Wilson's conviction. Each day brought new memories, no longer suppressed by drugs, memories of Sarah, of brief moments together, of love that had survived every attempt to erase it. James legally adopted Emily on her 8th birthday, the ceremony attended by Linda, Dr. Rachel Chen, and other allies from their struggle. Martha baked a cake decorated with roses, and Detective Reynolds presented Emily with a restored photograph of Sarah holding her as a baby, recovered from Wilson's sealed files. The Morrison mansion came alive again with Emily's presence. The rooms Sarah had decorated became spaces for healing and new memories. Emily chose to sleep in the blue bedroom that had appeared in her drug-suppressed dreams, somehow knowing it had been Sarah's favorite. Linda Parker, now retired but still a constant presence, helped Emily plant a new rose garden. "Your mother believed gardens were places of healing," she explained, showing Emily how to tend the flowers. "She'd be so proud to see you bringing life back to this place." Dr. Rachel Chen continued to monitor Emily's recovery, amazed by her brain's ability to rebuild neural pathways that Wilson's drugs had tried to destroy. "Your memories weren't erased," she explained to Emily. "They were just buried, waiting for you to be strong enough to reclaim them." The survivors' support group met regularly at the mansion, finding strength in shared experiences. Emily became a symbol of hope for others struggling to recover their lost memories. Her story proved that love could survive even the most determined efforts to destroy it. James watched his daughter flourish, seeing Sarah in her smile, her determination, her gentle spirit. Though the pain of losing Sarah would never completely fade, Emily's presence helped heal wounds he'd carried for years. Together, they built a new family from the ashes of Wilson's destruction. At night, Emily often sat in Sarah's reading room, surrounded by her mother's books and photographs. I talked to her sometimes, she confided to James. I tell her about my day, about the roses, about how much I loved the life she fought to give me. 5 years after Wilson's conviction, the Morrison estate hosted a dedication ceremony for the Sarah Morrison Center for Child Protection. The facility, built on the grounds of the former Rosehaven Orphanage, would serve as both a sanctuary for vulnerable children and a research center dedicated to ethical medical practices. Emily, now 13, cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony. Her speech, brief but powerful, moved many to tears. My mother believed that love was stronger than fear, stronger than drugs, stronger than evil. This center will help make sure no child ever has to fight as hard as we did to keep their memories, their identity, their right to be loved. The center became a model for reform in child welfare systems nationwide. Its comprehensive approach, combining medical care, psychological support, and family advocacy, helped reshape how society protected its most vulnerable members. The Sarah's Law, passed by Congress, established strict oversight of pharmaceutical testing and enhanced protections for orphaned children. Linda Parker, though retired, served on the center's advisory board, sharing her experiences to help train a new generation of caregivers. Dr. Rachel Chen headed the Medical Research Division, developing ethical protocols for pediatric drug trials. Martha Sullivan ran the dining hall, ensuring every child felt the warmth of a home-cooked meal. The survivors of Wilson's experiments found purpose in their pain. Many became advocates for child welfare reform, their testimonies helping to pass legislation protecting orphaned children. The support group they'd formed evolved into a national network, offering hope and healing to others recovering from trauma. James and Emily maintained Sarah's garden as a peaceful retreat for the center's residents. The rose bushes that had once hidden evidence of Wilson's crimes now bloomed as symbols of resilience and renewal. Children who came to the center found healing among the flowers Sarah had loved. On quiet evenings, Emily could often be found in the garden, reading from Sarah's journals to younger children at the center. Her story of memory surviving against all odds became a beacon of hope for others struggling to overcome their past. The lasting impact of Sarah's sacrifice and Emily's resilience extended far beyond the walls of the center. Their story sparked a national conversation about the exploitation of vulnerable children and society's responsibility to protect them. The changes they inspired would safeguard generations of children to come. Thank you for joining us for this powerful story of love, memory, and justice. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings about Emily and Sarah's journey. What moments touched you the most? How did their story affect you? Please support our team by subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with friends and family who might be moved by this tale of resilience and triumph over adversity. Your likes and comments help us continue creating meaningful content that shines a light on important issues. Don't forget to hit the like button below and join our growing community of storytellers and story lovers. Together, we can ensure that stories like Emily's continue to be told and remembered.